Today we're going to do a timing chain on a 2017 Nissan Pathfinder. But this is much more fun to work on. But no, we're going to work on the Pathfinder. So I got a start on it already. It took me quite a while to get the front pulley off. Had to make a tool to hold the balancer, and had to buy some tools to break the nut loose because it was in there at about 800,000 foot-pounds of torque. And but we've got power steering pump out. It's electric. Doesn't have to be. They could just made electric steering like everybody else, but no. And now we've got most of the engine ready to get to the timing cover. Just have to pull the engine mounts out and clear away some of the stuff out of the way and pop the cover off, and hopefully we're on our way to getting at the timing chains. Have the balancer off and you can see the chains drop down low when it's really loose already. It's making noise on the timing cover, so hopefully it didn't wreck anything, but we'll see shortly. Still taking timing cover stuff off. So I've got the cam phasers apart. Those are off. And now removing all the little bolts that hold the timing cover on. As a quick prelude, you can see the timing tensioner is fully extended. So that means that we've got a failure of one of the guides most likely, and the space is being taken up by the tensioner and it's maxed out and the chain's still loose, and that's why it's rattling. Okay, we've got the timing cover off of our 2017 Nissan Pathfinder here for the timing chain job, and we've exposed the gobbledygook behind the timing cover. Now this is one of the hardest things to do. You have to, Nissan didn't even think about servicing this. You have to take the oil pan off for 2 bolts for the cover. That's not a big deal. The alternator runs through the timing cover, so you have to unbolt it, which is virtually impossible to reach. And then you have to take the thermostat out to get the timing cover off for whatever reason. But anyways, it's off. And it barely comes out of here. So now you can see the timing tensioner fully extended. Okay, we've got this thing turned around so it's in time. And I can hear it clicking as I'm turning it. That's how loose that timing chain is, but it's still in time. So we've got the black link right here, lined up with the arrow on the front cam phaser. And then we've got the black link right here on the arrow on the rear cam phaser. The painted link is in the middle on the cam to cam at the rear, and the painted link is in the middle on the cam to cam at the front. Now I'm going to mark everything, clean it all up, mark everything, disassemble it, and put all the new components in. Okay, we have the timing set all taken apart. I have the water pump out, all the silicones cleaned up. I put the new drive gear on for the crank pulley. And getting ready to put the new timing chain, water pump, and all the tensioners on. And before we put the new chain on, we'll just put the two, hang them up here side by side, and you can see the old chain is about 1/2 inch longer than the new chain. That's how much it's stretched. The tension from 24 valve springs, the variable cam timing phasers, and the length of this chain stretches it that much in 200,000 kilometers. All right, we have our timing chain installed. So what I did was I took the top guide off and the tensioner guide, and on these, when you get everything lined up at top dead center and the cams are in the right spot and everything, you've got colored links on the chains. See, there's a darker one, and that lines up corresponding with the timing mark on that crank or that cam pulley. And right here, we have a similar situation. Can't see nothing. With the dark one right there, and it's lined up with the timing mark on here as well. And there you can see some green paint where the timing mark is. There's still a dot on the pulley, but they accented it with the green paint. And then down at the bottom, we have another colored link. It's a little bit gold, and that lines up with the timing mark on the crank gear. Now, the crank gear is on a key, so it can't move. It's in a good spot. But the oil pump that's driven behind that is not keyed for whatever reason. And the tension of the crank bolt is what sandwiches that oil pump gear against the crankshaft so that it, I imagine they did that in case the oil pump seizes so that the gear won't bind up and break the timing set. That's my guess for that. It'll just spin, the engine will lose oil pressure, the light will come on, maybe it'll shut off, and it will cause minimal damage to the engine. However, once the oil pump seizes up, I mean, most engines are pretty much a garbage pile when that happens anyway, but it is what it is. I think that's the engineering behind that. So we've got all that set up. The new tensioner is here, and what we do is, now that we have everything lined up, we can pull the pin out of that tensioner and it can actually do its job at tensioning. So what I'll do here is I'll do that right now. So it's locking this tensioner. I'll get some light here so we can see what's going on. You have a pin here holding it, you pull it, fire the hole, and there it goes. It's now tensioning the chain with about 1/4 of an inch extended. When we took this apart, the tensioner was out a full inch. That's how much slack was in the chain, and that's why it was grinding on the case and making all the racket. Now it's ready to reassemble the timing cover and the mounts and all the rest of this stuff. Okay, I spent about an hour cleaning the timing cover and the gasket surface on the engine block, because there's RTV just holds this or seals this up, and it was in little nooks and crannies that prevent the seal from blowing out under pressure or vacuum. And I got it all cleaned up, and then we re-RTV'd it and placed it on. The one tip is always place the cover on before you RTV anything, just to practice putting it on so that you don't accidentally move some RTV out of the way and leave a gap. And then do that a couple times. That way when you have it all glued up and you're putting it on, it's a one-time shot and it just works perfect every time. So that's the one tip for that. Now I got to replace about 15 bolts and put them all back in place. And then we'll put the cam phaser back together and RTV that back on as well. And then we can start putting mounts in reverse order of assembly. Another tip when you're putting in a container of bolts such as this back onto a motor is I try and keep each section of the teardown separated with a different container. So we have the timing cover and phasers all in here. the mounts, and other stuff that I had to take off in order to get to this step over here. And that's pretty much the bulk of it. Oh, the oil pan and stuff like that separated as well, just so that if you're unfamiliar with the engine, you don't have to label everything. Just keep them in separate containers, and you'll notice the long bolts end up in the spot where they go, so that there's adequate thread to put them in. The short bolts are for the phasers, and it'll just all seem to work out. There's not too many different size bolts, so you don't have to be scared. And the one trick is, when you're threading bolts in, don't thread a whole bunch of them in and then tighten them after. Thread one in, tighten it up, and when you thread it in by a few threads and leave it out a bit, so that way you just by visually you'll know, oh, that one's not tight. And that way at the end you have no loose bolts, no missing bolts, and it's one at a time and done right. We've got it done. I took it outside to wash it up. The only hitch we had after we started it up was the idle needed to be relearned, so I hooked it to my Autel scan tool, and we went through the relearn procedure and everything's fine. It's looking just good. No more rattling, no more clattering, and this thing will be good for another 100,000 K probably.